Welcome to this explainer. I am seriously pumped you're here. If you're currently prepping for the Florida Real Estate Sales Associate exam, the FREC I, well, you already know it's an absolute beast. You've got this massive syllabus to memorize, and the state, frankly, does not hand out these licenses easily. So today, we're going to conquer two of the absolute toughest, most heavily tested parts of the entire exam: brokerage relationships and escrow timelines.
Okay, let's just dive right into this. If you look at an actual failing score report from the exam provider, Pearson VUE, it tells quite a story. Imagine a candidate who scored a 68, literally just shy of that magic 75 passing grade. But if you look closely at where they lost points, it's eye-opening. Under authorized relationships, duties, and disclosures, they missed a point. And under real estate brokerage activities and procedures, they dropped 4 whole points. These are what I honestly call trap questions. The concepts aren't inherently all that difficult, but the specific legal phrasing will completely trip you up if you aren't crystal clear on the definitions. So we're going to make sure you don't leave any of these easy points on the table.
Now, what's really fascinating about this whole mix-up is how Florida law actually views your loyalty as a real estate licensee. To really master the exam, you have to be able to instantly recognize the difference between a single agent and a transaction broker. These are your two primary authorized relationships, and the state basically just wants to know that you understand exactly who you're working for and how you are allowed to represent them. So, let's pit them head to head.
First up, we have the single agent. A single agent operates under a really strict fiduciary relationship of trust and confidence. That key word there is fiduciary. If you ever see that word on the exam, boom, they're talking about a single agent. This means you owe your principal undivided loyalty, strict confidentiality, obedience, and full disclosure. You are legally bound to represent either the buyer or the seller in a transaction. You can never, ever represent both. You're basically their absolute champion, advocating solely for their best interests.
But let's contrast that with a transaction broker. A transaction broker provides what the law actually calls limited representation. So think of it this way. You can actually work with the buyer, the seller, or even both of them in the exact same real estate transaction. But, and this is a big but, you are not a fiduciary. When a customer agrees to this relationship, they're explicitly giving up their right to your undivided loyalty. Instead of being a fierce advocate for just one side, your job is really just to act as a facilitator to get the deal done. Your primary duty is super straightforward. Just don't work to the detriment of either party.
So, the absolutely crucial point here is this. Florida law actively presumes you are acting as a transaction broker. Let me actually say that again because it is heavily, heavily tested. According to the Florida statutes, all licensees are presumed to be transaction brokers unless a single agent relationship is explicitly established in writing. So if a question asks what your relationship is when no disclosures have been signed, the answer is always, always transaction broker. All right, let's move on to our next major hurdle and see how this all builds. Real estate is all about handling other people's money, right? And the state of Florida takes this incredibly seriously. You will be tested on the extremely strict timeline for handling earnest money, which is also known as escrow deposits. It's essentially a 3-step dance between the buyer, the sales associate, and the broker. And you better believe the clock starts ticking the literal second that check touches your hand.
So I want you to remember the number 1. When a sales associate receives a deposit from a customer, they absolutely must deliver those funds to their employing broker no later than the end of the next business day. And notice I said business day, not calendar day. Saturdays, Sundays, and legal holidays, they do not count.
Okay, now remember the number 3. Once the broker actually has the funds, they have to place them into the escrow account immediately. But how does the law actually define immediately? Well, the Florida Real Estate Commission rules say immediately means no later than the end of the 3rd business day following the initial receipt of the funds by the brokerage. This timeline is absolute, no exceptions.
Now, what happens if the deal completely falls apart and both the buyer and the seller are demanding that earnest money? We've got a timeline for that too. If there are conflicting demands on that escrow money and the broker has a good faith doubt about who gets it, they have exactly 15 business days to notify the FREC in writing.
All right, it's bootcamp time. We've covered a ton of dense legal mechanics just now, so let's lock all this in with a rapid review quiz. Active recall is by far the best way to prepare for these exams. I'm going to read a question, pause for a second, and I want you to literally shout out the answer before I reveal it. Ready? Let's go.
Question 1. Based on Florida disciplinary guidelines, what is the penalty for a broker failing to immediately deposit escrow funds? Take a second to think about it. And the answer brilliantly illustrates just how incredibly strict the state really is. It's a $1,000 administrative fine and a 30-day suspension, all the way up to a $2,500 fine and permanent license revocation. Why so harsh? Because the state protects consumer trust funds above absolutely everything else. Losing your license over this is a very real possibility, so seriously, do not mess with the escrow timeline.
Awesome. Let's keep the momentum going. Question 2. Under which authorized brokerage relationship is a client not responsible for the acts of the real estate licensee?
If you said transaction broker, you nailed it. Because the licensee is only providing that limited representation and acting as a facilitator, they aren't technically an agent of the principal. Therefore, the buyer or seller is completely shielded and not legally responsible for whatever the licensee does.
All right, question 3. We know both relationships require you to deal honestly and fairly, right? But what 4 specific duties are completely unique to a single agent?
Loyalty, confidentiality, obedience, and full disclosure. These are the exclusive hallmarks of a true fiduciary. If a transaction broker ever tries to offer undivided loyalty, they are literally breaking the law.
Okay, last question. Question 4. We already established that a broker has 15 business days to notify the FREC in writing about conflicting demands on an escrow account. But how many days does that broker have to actually institute a formal settlement procedure, like mediation or arbitration?
30 business days. And specifically, that's 30 business days from the last party's demand. The state tests this constantly to see if you're going to mix up the 15-day written notice requirement with the 30-day requirement to actually take action. You've got to keep those two numbers totally separate in your head.
Before we completely wrap up today, I really want to leave you with one final look at just how incredibly precise Florida real estate law is. Think about the mandatory receipt language for selling rental lists. If you sell a prospective tenant a rental list, and it happens to be inaccurate in any material aspect, the law requires you to give a 100% full refund if they demand it within 30 days. It's actually a first-degree misdemeanor to mess this up. So I'm going to leave you with this final thought. The law doesn't leave room for close enough, and frankly, neither does the exam. Are you ready to bring this exact level of precision to exam day? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Study hard, and I'll catch you on the next one.